All right. Hopefully, I'm in. Hopefully, somewhere towards the middle of the screen. So this video, you get a lot of me today. This video, I'm going to go over what I think is a good formula to use for determining, kind of a value of a long-term contract. Because I think we can all be in agreement that longer contracts should be worth more than one-year deals. Especially for long or for the expensive guys. I will tell you, Mike mentioned a few of these things, and we talked a little bit about it on Friday, which may have spilled over into the video, which I mentioned I don't feel terribly strongly about. But should age come into play? Should loyalty come into play? A guy wanting to win a championship, experience, workload. If we were to come up with a formula to take into consideration all of those factors, it would be way, way, way too complicated. The formula that I'm going to show you here shortly, it's not that complicated, but I think it does a very good job of, just giving a nice broad overview of value for each of the different contract lengths that we do allow. So, compromise. Obviously, there's four boisterous people, myself, Derek Newberta, Roger, and to an extent Ferguson, that feel like something needs to happen here. There's two people, Mike Mostrom, and my brother Durs, that are absolutely against this. I know that the four of us, we are inching closer towards what you guys want, and there doesn't seem to be any. We're trying to meet you halfway. Compromise is our friend. So some of the things that Mike and Andy should like. This does not force teams to sign players to long term, but there's a small penalty if you only want to sign them to 1 year. And the fact that there's more value given if you sign them to long-term contracts. So it does still encourage long-term contracts, which if we're a dynasty league, I think that we should encourage that. Despite my few examples that I threw out there, there are some examples where they are backloaded contracts, or front-loaded contracts. Usually they're backloaded, but I don't think that works for our league, given the way that our cap penalties are set up. To put $400 worth of a contract 4 years from now, and then drop the dude after the season. Yeah, I don't think that we want that. I don't think necessarily that we want to front load contracts either. We were just bull spitting a little bit, trying to come up with creative ways to encourage long-term deals. So my formula does not front load, it does not back load for those reasons. To this point, I don't think that there's a formula to determine the best contract come restricted free agent time. Now we're a couple years away from that yet, but we should get something hammered down sooner rather than later. This can work for that, to determine what exactly is the best contract in the interest of the player. So the formula. This determines the actual value of the contract, or at least that's what I'm attempting to do. I'm trying to figure out exactly how valuable a 5-year contract is versus a 4-year contract, and so on. Now, the formula, it does give added value, gives a bump in value based on how long the contract is. Longer contracts should be considered worth more to the player, especially for the expensive players, than 1 year or 2 year contracts. So basically the formula, it's based on the length of the contract. The longer the contract is, the more value there is in the contract, even if it's the exact same salary. The longer it is, the more value there is in it. I'm going to show you the formula here in just a minute. It does look kind of complicated, but in terms of actual implementation, once you really stare at it, it's actually not all that bad. I can't remember if I mentioned this in an earlier video or not. I'm not out to make this league so that only stats professors can do well in it. I am out to encourage it being a dynasty. where there is some added value to long-term contracts. So here, flip it around here, and we can see our formula. So the formula that I'm suggesting, the value of the contract will equal the salary of the contract plus a bump based on how long the contract is. So the factor is basically the percentage that we want to add, and then the length minus 1 is just the number of contract years minus 1. So the longer the contract, the larger this bump over here. The factor that I'm going to use in my example here, and a suggested factor, I think a good value is 5%. I'm not sold on that yet. I myself have to do some more digging. I think you guys should do some digging. But then the bump is also based on the salary as well. So we have the original salary plus a bump that's based on, this factor that we'll come up with, how long the contract is, and what the salary actually is. So we have an example here. Let's say there was a $105 contract signed for 2 years. How much value does that have? Plugging it into this formula, and there is an alternate form of this formula too. Maybe I'll post that. It's the exact same formula, just written a little differently. But 105 plus, and then we have length minus 1, so a 2-year contract gets 1 extra year, so 1 extra bump, times the salary, times our percentage factor here. So when you calculate that all out, this contract is worth $110.25 due to the fact that it's a little bit longer. So essentially, by this formula, this contract has more value than a 1-year $110 contract because it's worth $110.25. Yeah, and again, it may sound really, really complicated. It's really not all that complicated. I will include this spreadsheet. So something else here. I mean, we can change this factor, 3%, 8%, and then you can see the changes that happen over here, over on the side. Basically, if we get these 4 deals, obviously we'll plug in. If there happens to be a guy that offers a 1-year deal, a 2-year deal, a 3-year deal, a 4-year deal, or a 5-year deal, we'll just take the highest one over here, and we can just plug it in right here. Whichever one turns up green has the most value. So the larger the number here, the better the contract, according to the formula for the player. So based on this, if we use 3%, again, not sold on completely sold on the 3%. I personally like the 5%. But anyway, based on this, the best contract that this player would have been offered is a 2-year deal for $98. According to the formula, that's better than a 1-year deal for $100, a 3-year deal for $91, or a 4-year deal for $87. Again, just according to my formula. Also on here, working at it from a little bit different angle, we can put in what you actually want to bid. So here, if I want to bid $95 for 3 years, according to the formula, that has a value of 104.5 WSNX. I think it's still WSNX. So then down here, based on this value of 104.5, it would beat out a $104 contract for 1 year, but it would lose to a $105 contract for 1 year. It would beat out a $99 contract for 2 years, but lose to a $100 contract for 2 years. Obviously, it ties a $95 contract for 3 years because that's what it actually is. Beats a $90 contract for 4 years, loses to a $91 contract for 4 years, and beats an $87 contract for 4 years, loses to an $88 contract for 4 years. So the combination of this and this spreadsheet, if we do decide to adopt this formula, if we're trying to encourage long-term values while not forcing guys to sign long-term values, this just plugging them into the spreadsheet doesn't take very long, and I think it does a very good job in estimating what an actual value of the contract is. So in my opinion, this is more realistic than our current non-model where it just doesn't matter, where the salary is the same no matter how many contract years there are. I don't think that this should apply to cheaper contracts. We don't currently have any issues with dudes signing for long term, the cheaper contracts. So I think we need to come up with a good threshold where if it's above $60 or if it's above $80, then we apply this sort of strategy. So if you're bidding more than whatever we determine this threshold to be, not only do you have to put the salary on the whiteboard, but you would have to put how many years you're willing to sign him as well. And then we can plug all of those into the spreadsheet that I developed, and that'll spit out which contract has the most value. Once the auction is done, you may decide to put even more contract years on it, because the longer the contract, the better the value. So like if you need a little bit more help to reach that minimum of 50, then you can still add more contract years on. You just can't take more off because that's not what you promised them in your bid. So yeah, I will be bringing this up in D1 as well. It's going to be a little bit harder to implement if we do switch to an actual back and forth bidding auction, because we don't want to have to plug it into here every single time to make sure that the value is greater than what it is. So this, if we adopt this, I would argue that this means that we would have to stick with the whiteboards, I think. But yeah, so a complete understanding of what this value means might be a little bit difficult, but if we do decide to do this, it would not be that hard to implement. And at the very least, I think this should be used for restricted free agents. But those are just my thoughts. I'm just one man. I'm a boisterous man, but I'm just one man in this league. If you have questions on this, if you like it, if you hate it, I think this is a good compromise for all those of us that are actually, voicing our opinions on the matter. Let me know. It can be tweaked. The 5%, that's not a deal breaker for me. I don't, within reason, I don't really care what the factor actually is. But I do think we need to give some value for long-term contracts. Let me know. Peace.